Hello and welcome to In the Classroom with Benjamin Stewart, episode number 39. In this broadcast, I want to share with you a recent discussion I had with my Thesis Seminar group. This is a group that is conducting research, and I'm going to give a brief discussion here, talking about the method section, what to consider, and talk about sampling, and most of it as it relates to qualitative studies. Most of our learners are doing qualitative studies and mixed methods only to the degree that they're doing descriptive statistics, so no inferential statistics, no quantitative studies where hypotheses are being used. Again, most are using or focusing on qualitative studies. The first thing I want to draw your attention to is the schedule. So today we start a very important part of this process for a thesis seminar. We're now transitioning from your theory, your literature review, now to the particulars of your own study, right? This is day one. This is our first day now that we're talking about your particular study. So today is March 4th. We have 6 weeks. Starting today, we have 6 weeks to design our instruments and to collect our data. Now you'll notice on our schedule, the 6th week, actually the week after, is Holy Week. Okay, so according to our schedule, okay, we're right here. So we have this week, we've got 6 weeks until this week here where we have Holy Week. All right, I don't usually count Holy Week for our data collection. Why? Because most of the schools that you're going to be observing, talking, working with, they're going to have parties, they're going to have, they're not going to have classes like they normally would because things are, or maybe they have exams. That's very common, right? They may have exams, and the exams may not help you through your observations. So I don't count the last week. If you get a few more observations that last week, God bless, high fives, right? Great, that's awesome. But I don't count that week. So that's why I'm counting 6 weeks, 3 weeks for the instrument design, 3 weeks to collect your data, and so plan accordingly. As Marister was talking about, it's very important that you have your schedule, and things could change, of course, but make sure that you have a clear schedule about when and how you're going to be observing. So I want to talk a little bit today about, Marister got into some specifics of data collection, really some good information there. I want to talk a little bit more generally about the methods section and put everything that she talked about into kind of a context. So the purpose of the methods section is very simple. We want to know how you collected your data, how you performed your study. If another researcher, wants to replicate or duplicate your study, what do I need to know in order to do that? How many words do we need to include in our method section, more or less? How many words, more or less? Approximately 500 words. That's not a lot. It's not a lot, but it's very important, right? In 500 words, we're going to explain how we're going to conduct our study. Now, I've got some slides here at the beginning that I'm just going to go over very briefly. This slide, this whole presentation I'm going to share with you with the idea that maybe some of this information you can go back to. There's some other things I want to get to, but basically the purpose statement, the main point I want to make is I would suggest that you don't present your study, that is, you don't mention your study until the last paragraph of your literature review, that transitional paragraph where you're going to state the purpose of your study. The purpose of the study is to, and then you state your purpose. Okay, so try to include at the end, and I have an example here, and I'm sure we've been talking with your tutor, with Marister and myself, about this last paragraph, right? About introducing your research questions. stating your purpose, restating the problem. Remember that we're all dealing with a problem. This is what gives our study a significance. Why are you doing this study? For a very specific purpose, for a very specific problem. Okay? If we don't have a problem, there's no point of spending 16 weeks on doing research if there's no problem to be understood. Okay, so the main thing here is to introduce your research questions here at the end of your literature review as you go into the methods section. Now, the methods section, we want to share two different options, two different ways that you can organize your methods section, and they're both acceptable. Okay, I would choose one of these. I wouldn't deviate from either one of these. Okay, the first option is to divide up your methods section into 3 subsections or 3 paragraphs. The first, participants. Okay, so you're going to mention who your participants are, their ages, any relevant information relevant to your research questions. Okay, so your participants, what academic level? Are they English 1, beginners, intermediate? Is it a public school, private school? Who are your participants for your study? This is also called the demographic information. So what information do you need for your study? The second section, you're going to introduce your instruments and your procedure. Your instruments, right? So are you going to use questionnaires, surveys? Maybe you use some sort of observational sheet format that you use to observe your classes. You might even use an interview guide, right? So the instruments can be the interview guide, not the interview itself. The interview guide, a list of potential questions that you could ask your participants. That could be an instrument. Okay, and then the procedure. Explain how did you collect the data? How did you use those instruments to collect your data? This is going to be the second section in your method section. The last section, the third section, this is where you can talk about the research design and how you analyzed the information. And we'll talk more in our next whole group session, which is scheduled April 15th, if you want to mark it on your schedule. 9 o'clock, April 15th, we'll have another session just like this where we talk about the data analysis, but this is where you're going to include the data analysis and the research design. Are you doing a qualitative research, quantitative, or mixed methods? Most of you are doing qualitative. Some of you might be doing mixed methods.
Teacher,
yes?
The section 3 is for describing the research, like the method that we are using?
Yeah, so in the research design, you can say this is a qualitative study, right? And the information was collected through interviews and analyzed using a coding, a multiple coding level system, right? For example, right?
You have to explain what a qualitative study is, right?
No. Again, well, in my point of view, and Marister can, I don't know if you agree, but we only have 500 words, right? And so we don't want a long explanation about the history of qualitative research, right? We just want to say this is a qualitative research to find rich information or to describe. Here are some key words, though, you can include in here. Are you describing? Are you explaining? Are you confirming? These are some key words that you can include in this section to describe the kind of study that you're doing, besides just saying, is it it's a qualitative study or a mixed methods. Okay, so again, 500 words for the whole method section. In this case, in this example, you would have basically 3 paragraphs. And I would have a level 2 heading for participants, instruments, and research design. Those of you who are with me, actually, the template looks something like this. In fact, looks exactly like this. I don't know. It just happened that way. I don't know how it happened. No, but this is one way, okay? Another way is you can divide it up into research design, the type of study, participants / ethics, methods or the instruments, the data collection protocol, and the data analysis. Okay, this is another way. Okay, so probably either option 1 or option 2 would be fine. Any other options I would be careful with. All right, so and again, these are different ways that you can organize your method section. Yes.
What do you mean by ethics?
Okay. Sorry. In this time, since you didn't have the opportunity to have the course about qualitative research last year, yes, we are going to be very practical. Yes, so ethics, we used to have a part of it. We are not using that. So we are going to be very economical, only 500 words. Yes, because that is what you are doing right now. It is what you know. We haven't told you in the way that we did it previous years. Okay? So forget about ethics in that way, a long description.
Another way to think about ethics is, as we've already talked about, the consent form.
Yes.
So you can say things like, consent was granted before I started this research. The names have been protected. We're using pseudonyms to protect the confidentiality or the anonymity of the person. Quick question, what's the difference between confidentiality and anonymity? Because sometimes we get these terms confused. Confidentiality and anonymity, what's the difference? Sorry? What do you?
I was thinking that anonymity is
Mhm.
when you don't say the names of the person that you're talking with, or the company, or the students, or whatever. And confidentiality is whenever you keep the information only for the research, not for.
Okay, so confidentiality, yes, would be those cases where you're using pseudonyms. So you're using fake names to protect. So we don't know who said what, who did what. Anonymity is where you don't know who answered what. You have information, you have data, but you don't know which participant said what. That's anonymity. So there would be no idea who said what.
Only with questions.
Yeah, you could do like a questionnaire and not have the respondents put their name, right? So you would have the results from the questionnaire, but you wouldn't know who answered what. Okay, and so there's advantages and disadvantages to both, but you just make sure that you're using the correct term if you mean confidentiality or if you mean anonymity or anonymous. Okay. All right, data collection. Just a quick slide on the title of your study. A title should tell your audience who your study population is. So just a quick note there. Whenever you're creating the title for your thesis, make sure that it reflects the audience. And the title is going to go at the very beginning of your thesis, right after the abstract. So we're not going to have a section called Introduction. Or we're not going to have a title called Literature Review. We're going to have the title of your document, and that's going to begin your study. Unit of analysis. Before you can collect data, before you can make decisions about interviews and observations, you need to answer one simple question. What's your unit of analysis? If you don't know what your unit of analysis is, you're not ready to think about your instruments, because your instruments are designed or should be designed to analyze the unit of analysis. What are some examples of unit of analysis? Well, critical incidents might be certain episodes or situations, maybe like a classroom activity if you're looking at a very specific type of, when a teacher gives instructions, for example. That would be an incident or an episode. That could be a unit of analysis, and you're just focusing on when the teacher gives instructions, right? Another example of a unit of analysis, the individual. Could be the teacher, could be the student. All right, that could be another unit of analysis. A group. The group analysis the unit of analysis could be the whole class, the group. And you're looking at 2 or 3 different classes. And you're comparing and contrasting those groups. It could also be at the departmental level. It could be at the school level. Okay, so it can get broader. But make sure that you have a unit of analysis. Very important to have that before you're thinking about your data collection. Now, recruitment. This is very important. How are you going to choose your participants? It's very important. And I've got a few slides here. And as we go through some of these slides, I'd like for you to take notes about which ones you think are most relevant to your particular study based on your unit of analysis. Be careful. Some of you might be doing your study where you work. Some of you might be doing your research where you have some contact. You know the surroundings, you know the school, you know the individuals. And that's fine. But just make sure that there's separation, that you're not influencing, that you're not too close to the study. Remember that in applied linguistics, you guys did a participatory action research, right? You did a study on your own practice. This semester, we need to be observing someone else. So make sure if you're doing your study where you work, that you're not doing your study on your own group, that it's someone else, it's a different group, it's a different teacher, that it's not your own particular group. So make sure that there is some separation between what you're observing, what you're doing, and your own personal practice and experiences. Okay. All right, now sample size. Before we get into choosing and how we can go about choosing, sample sizes. How many participants? This is a common question as we get started. How many participants do we need? And the sample size is not necessarily indicative of the time that you're going to spend. For example, if you only have one participant, you could do a case study on one teacher. Okay? You could do have one participant, and in this case, you're obviously going to have more observations. You're going to have more interviews, right? You're going to have any other data source that you need to understand this one person. So that's going to be different than, let's say, if you have 3 participants. Let's say you want to focus on 3 teachers and compare and contrast those 3 teachers. You might have slightly fewer observations and interviews. So it's just going to depend. We have 3 weeks to collect our data, and we want to get as much information as possible. We want to make sure that we have different types of information, so it's not all interviews, it's not all observations, but that there's a combination of data sources. Okay, we call that triangulation. We need to make sure we triangulate the information, and it could be dependent on one participant or several. Okay? Does this make sense here, the sample size? Guys, any questions about sample sizes? All right, so the purposeful sampling. Now, purposeful sampling. So when you choose your participants, there needs to be a reason why you're doing it. Okay, it's not just, happenstance. It's not by luck. There are different ways of doing it. And so I'm going to touch on a few of some of the common ways. There are many ways. But one way that you can choose your participants are to look for extreme cases. Okay, so if it's students and there's some extreme cases or even teachers, those could be reasons for choosing a particular set of participants. Okay, so outstanding successes, topics, they got a misspelled word there, topic of the class, dropouts, exotic events, and crisis. Okay, this would be an example of extreme case sampling. Some of you might choose students, poor students versus good students. This is another way that you can collect your students, your participants. Maybe the teachers have some sort of record or some sort of background that you chose that is exemplary, that's good. You can choose that. Some of you might choose based on changes, differences. Okay, so in this case we have maximum variation. We have different types of cases. So maybe some students have or advanced levels and they have a high TOEFL score. Others have low TOEFL score. Maybe some of them go to a private school, some go to a public school. Some of your cases, you might want to look for something in common, that they're very similar. Okay, so that might be a reason for choosing different participants, okay, because of their similarities. All right, so I'm not going to go through all of these. There are several that I think are worth having a discussion with, with me and Maria Esther when you're making your decisions about who you're going to be researching. But the one thing I want to make sure here is there is one that's called convenience sampling, and this is the one that we probably don't want to do. Sometimes we have students say, well, I want to choose this teacher because the school is right next to my house. All right, and I can save a lot of time, and it's convenient. Usually this is the worst way that you can choose your participants. Okay, I'm not going to say that you can never use it, but for the most part, we want to have a different reason why we chose a particular set of teachers or students for a study. So for the most part, we want to try to avoid convenience sampling. All right, so when you get into your field work and you're taking field notes, there are different aspects of your study, your different, they call them dimensions of your field work. And if you look at these 6 points, think of each one of these as a continuum. Okay, so on one side, we have what's called a full participant. That's when you, the researcher, is actually a participant in the study. You're working very close with your participants and you're part of the study. The other side of the continuum is you are a spectator. You're looking at it from afar. And you're not involved in the actual goings-on of what you're observing. You're just observing. It's just like you step into a classroom, nobody knows you're there, and you're just watching, and you stay out of it. The other extreme case would be you're actually in there doing the activities with the participants, and you're collecting data. Okay? You're probably going to be somewhere in the middle. Probably more towards this side, but this is a continuum. The second, inside versus outside perspective. Now this is very important. The inside perspective, or the participants, what's their feelings, what's their views of what's going on, of the phenomenon. The other side of the continuum is your perspective from the outsider, as the researcher. What's your perspective about the situation? Who conducts the inquiry? So only the researchers? Or people in the setting? Okay, so people in the setting or only the researchers? For the most part, most of us are going to be along this side. You're designing this. Okay, this is probably not the school setting telling you what you're looking for. You're doing it based on your literature review. This is very important here, disclosure of the observer's role. This is very important. How much of the research do your participants know? So when you walk in and you observe the very first day, do they know what you're looking for? And if they do know, is that going to influence positively or negatively what you're observing? I mean, think about your own case. How much are they going to know about your study, and at what point will they know more, especially if you're doing interviews? Because at some point, through the interviews, they're going to find out, oh, okay, this person's looking for L1, L2 because of all the questions. And they're looking to see how much I speak Spanish and how much I speak English in my class. I wish I had known that before. I would have spoken more, whatever. Right? If you have an interview from day one and say, okay, what are your thoughts on L1, L2 in the classroom? And then you observe the next day Do you think that's going to influence? I think so. And it may not be in something that you want to do. So this is where you have to work very closely with us to make sure you're making the best decisions. At what point are you going to observe? At what point are you going to conduct that interview? At what point are you going to conduct some sort of questionnaire? Because there's not one way to do it. It all depends on your research questions and all of these other dimensions of your study. Okay, so it's not like an easy answer. Okay, it's best everybody do this. First you observe, then you interview. No, it depends. All right, so be very careful with how much you're disclosing about your study, if at all. Maybe you decide you're not going to disclose anything throughout the whole process. Duration, for our purposes, it's short term, right? We've got basically 3 weeks to collect our data, and that's about it. And focus on observations. Okay, are we focusing on a single element, or are we focusing more exploratory? Okay, again, this is all going to depend on your research questions. What are you focusing on? Now, mentioning this about the focus of your observations, when you're doing your questionnaires, right? Sometimes we see this, we'll have a questionnaire and it'll ask for the age of the participants. How old are you, right? That's it for a teacher, for example. Ask yourself, do I need to know, is it important, is it relevant, the age of the teacher for the purposes of my research questions, right? If it's not, if you answer no to that question, you say, no, it doesn't matter how old they are, well then don't ask them what their age is in the questionnaire, right? You want to ask questions about, you need information that relates to your research questions. So no extraneous information, no extra information that doesn't specifically pertain to your research questions. All right? Any questions? I know this is a lot of information here, but I think this slide is worth looking at and considering for your own study. Any questions about anything I've mentioned here with regard to the dimensions of the study? No? All right, moving on. Now, I'm not going to go through all of this. Marister talked a lot about different ways of collecting the data. I want to just emphasize again the differences, the important difference between field notes, what you observe, and I call it analytic memos or reflection notes. What is your interpretation of the behavior? So these are like your notes to yourself. Analytic memos are your reflections on the notes that you took. Okay, so again, the field notes are the observations, and the analytic memos are your reflections on those. Observations, of course, is one type of data collection. Interviews, okay, we're going to be doing some interviews. Yes, I would agree that semi-structured are probably the most common types of interviews, where you have some set of questions, but it's more conversational. Okay, so you really want to create, for the most part, create a conversation so the participant feels open, feels relaxed, feels willing to share with you information about their teaching practice. That's very important. If the participant is all nervous and feels like it's a test, like a quiz, right, and you're being under a spotlight, right, they're going to be afraid, and they're probably not going to be willing to express their feelings, right? So realize that the school, the institution, the teachers, the participants, they're doing you a favor. They're doing you a favor by allowing you into their classroom and allowing you to ask questions and them answering questions. So make sure that the interview that you prepare, but make sure that, the ethics is very important in that respect. Documents. This is another data source. We're looking for ways that we can triangulate our study, use different types of evidence. And one way is documents. The most common type of document, student homework. Student homework, that's the evidence. That could be a data source. All right, so if you're collecting information, student homework might be something that you need to account for, something that you need to include in your analysis. It could also be the syllabus, the lesson plan. It could be a policy. It could be the mission statement of the school, the vision statement. Any other policies that the school has. Those are all other documents that you can analyze and include into your analysis. Audio-visual materials, any realia or technologies that the teacher's using in class, for example, or that the students are using. These are all potential data sources that you can use.
Textbooks.
Textbooks, of course, course books. Right, exactly. So textbooks, definitely. All right, so we have observations, interviews, documents, audio-visual types of information. Those are the four I think are the most common types, right? Looking for ways to triangulate our information. All right, so this is basically what I wanted to share with you guys today. Again, there's a lot of information here. I want to share this with you, and these are things that we're going to be talking with you about more specifically. But I think the importance of ethics and making sure that you're reaching out to the participants and that you're planning as much as you can beforehand so that things that go smoothly. There are going to be days where they're going to say, I know we talked about you observing my class today, but I can't for whatever reason, right? That's going to come up, and so as much as we can plan ahead, the better. There's a couple of things here I wanted to mention also. Interventions. Now, remember the slide, the different dimensions of a study. Part of it is how much are you going to be involved, how much are you going to be kind of as an observer. So when I use the term intervention, what I mean by that is there are going to be cases where you think you've chosen the right participant and you observe only to find out that what you're observing, you're not getting the information you need to answer your questions. Now, we're going to do everything that we can, we as in all of us together with you, are to avoid those situations. But sometimes it happens. Right? Sometimes it happens, we go in and we're not getting any information. So there are cases where some students choose to do an intervention. And intervention is then where you start to work closer with the teacher, for example, the participant, and you're proposing, suggesting, you're planning together, working together with the teacher in order for him or her to do something in the classroom that relates to your research questions. The simplest example would be maybe some use of the technology, right? Maybe you're doing a study on WhatsApp, and you think that the teacher's going to be using WhatsApp for vocabulary, for example, but you go in and he or she just uses WhatsApp just for social purposes, not academic purposes. And you're like, oh, well, that's not exactly, I need WhatsApp and vocabulary learning, those are my research questions. You might have to go in and suggest and work with the teacher and do what's called an intervention. And that's where we're going to work very closely with you to help you decide to what degree you intervene, right? Because there's a balance. We don't want to intervene too much. It's a thing, right? So that's something that hopefully, everything is going to go smoothly, and all of your participants will give you exactly what you need. But sometimes it does happen, and we want to at least bring up this idea of intervention as an alternative if in the event you choose the participants and they don't give you what you want. Okay, so interventions. No, and it doesn't. It's not something negative, right? I mean, it's just a different approach. And here's the thing too with qualitative research. things are going to change, they evolve, they emerge. And I know my students, my group is probably sick of me asking, okay, what's your thesis statement? Oh, what's your research questions? Because every week, that's what we talk about. And guess what? Probably the next 3 or 4 weeks, I'm going to ask, okay, so what's your research question again? Okay. And it's perfectly acceptable and it's part of the process. As you collect the data, if we need to modify slightly, the key word is slightly, if we need to modify slightly the research questions, that's part of the process. Of course, we don't want to be changing topics at this point, but it's part of the process. It's part of the process. So we're going to try to help you plan as much as possible how to collect the data, but as you collect the data, things are going to be changing and shifting and emerging, and that's really the fun part, I think, of qualitative research, because seldom do you say, okay, the next 3 weeks it's going to be like this, and it doesn't change. Sometimes it does change. All right? So embrace the change. Embrace the change. ¿Qué más? I think that's all I have. Anybody have any questions? Anything else to? Yes.
So for this section, we are designing the instruments and doing the 500 rational, and that's it.
Okay, so over the next 6 weeks, it's going to be divided into the design of your instruments and collecting your data. Now, I say that because in the schedule it says 3 weeks design of the instruments, and then 3 weeks collecting the data. And certainly that could be how it ends up. But sometimes there's some overlap. And sometimes you'll be designing an instrument and then you collect some information and then design another instrument and collect some more information. So basically look at the next 6 weeks for designing your instrument, collecting your data, and getting the information you need to complete the 500 words for your method section. Okay? Because everything we're doing over the next 6 weeks, we're going to need that to complete the 500 words for your study. All right? You're going to... Yes?
For example, I can observe and then I can not design, but to complement my interview.
Yes, I mean, you can... Yeah, without looking at your research questions and getting into the specifics, the question is it possible, is there a scenario where you could apply a questionnaire, you design it, apply it, and then wait and analyze that questionnaire, and then based on that analysis say, oh, okay, now I'm going to observe this, so I'm going to design my observation guide based on how they answered the questionnaire. And so now I'm doing my observations and I notice some things and I say, oh, you know what? I've got to interview these things and this and this and this. So I then design my interview guide, and so see how it's kind of unfolding throughout the process, right? So it's going to depend. We're going to try to give you some suggestions about possible, for all of it. But when you get down to it and you start doing the analysis, changes come up. And so we're going to try our best to work with you to find the right combination of planning so that you're not wasting any time, because we don't have any time to waste over the next 6 weeks. And we really want to try to get it all taken care of within the 6 weeks before the Holy Week, which is kind of a write-off. So basically that's, and I can't say that that's going to be the best way for everybody, because it's going to depend on your research questions, right? It's very contextualized, each one of your projects. Okay. Any other questions? No? Anything else? No? All right. Well, thank you guys. Remember our next meeting, April 15th at 9 o'clock. We'll have another whole group session to discuss data analysis.
Okay, I know that I have 5 absents. I know that I have 5 students that are absent. Yes, I count, you are 17 with me. So, because we say that this is compulsory.
Can we pass a list, maybe? Can someone pass a list, please? Just write your names. I didn't think about it. I didn't think about it.
No, you don't know?
Well, I do, but are you sure about yours?
I'm sure about mine.
I guess I can remember your faces. Sí, por favor, ya. Whoop, sorry.
We're supposed to be that from 9:30 to 10. Can we meet tomorrow? What time are you free?
Yeah, let me check here.